Children are often described as the future of our countries, our cities, and our communities. However, throughout history, states, cities, and school districts across the country have cultivated discriminatory laws, policies, and practices that maintain the inequality of our children. Even after the Supreme Court ruled in Brown v. Board of Education that racial segregation of children in public schools violated the 14th Amendment, integration remained an uphill battle. Community engagement and court oversight led to the desegregation of individual public schools and the triumphant appointment of Philadelphia's first black superintendent, but resistance, changing demographics, and shifting priorities tragically drove the district and the courts to ultimately abandon the goal of citywide integration. During the Second Great Migration, the black population in Philadelphia grew 160%. Blacks moved from the rural South to the urban North, seeking better jobs and living conditions. They settled primarily in West and North Philadelphia, which became increasingly segregated. Predatory lending, housing, and job discrimination drove many blacks into poverty, making it difficult for them to escape these neighborhoods. Negrophobia led many white residents to flee to newly developing suburbs and neighborhoods like Northeast Philadelphia. Segregated neighborhoods gave rise to segregated schools. By 1960, 92% of black, school-aged children were enrolled in the public school system, while 55% of white children attended parochial schools. Furthermore, the majority of black students attended segregated schools, which were often located in older, segregated, densely populated sections of the city. As a result, school buildings were overcrowded, under-resourced, and dilapidated. The School District of Philadelphia, or SDP's, long-standing practice of prohibiting black teachers from teaching white students reinforced segregation, even after the policy was officially ended in the mid-1930s. World War II inspired a campaign for equal treatment of blacks by organizations such as the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. The NAACP successfully challenged school segregation on a national level with Brown v. Board of Education in 1954, which galvanized communities across the country to demand integration. Community groups such as the Emlyn Federation of Civic Organizations, or EFCO, emerged in the racially changing neighborhoods of West and Northwest Philadelphia to take steps towards integration. EFCO is the first of these organizations to triumph by holding the school district accountable in court. The Emlyn Public School had become overcrowded and segregated due to excessive student transfers of both black and white students in the late 1950s. As a result, the day school was built nearby to reduce overcrowding. Although both schools were located in the diversifying Mount Airy neighborhood of Northwest Philadelphia, their boundary lines were drawn to ensure their segregation. When black teachers were assigned to Emlyn, white parents assumed the district had declared it an all-black school and transferred their children out. After the SDP refused to address their concerns, EFCO partnered with the Philadelphia NAACP to take legal action. In Chisholm v. Board of Public Education, a federal lawsuit filed in 1961, the plaintiffs argued that the SDP purposefully established racist school policies, practices, and boundaries to create segregated schools. The court ordered the district to formulate a plan for desegregating its schools and submit regular progress reports. Community engagement and court oversight had triumphed over racism and resistance. Although Chisholm was expected to be a Northern Brown, it accomplished little. The Lewis Committee, appointed by the judge to prepare recommendations for the SDP, formulated a report that was not prescriptive enough to prompt real change, and the school district ignored it. The national NAACP did not provide enough support to bring a stronger case, and the local chapter did not have the resources to survey conditions in the public schools.
We didn't have the manpower to examine the histories of so many individual school systems to prove intent.
The case was dismissed in 1971. Tragically, EFCO's attempt to bring about desegregation through the federal court had failed. The Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, or PHRC, continued to battle the SDP in the Commonwealth Court, established in 1955 to address the problem of de facto as well as de jure segregation. The PHRC filed 11 lawsuits over 40 years to force the district to present and comply with a satisfactory plan to desegregate its schools. The PHRC oversaw district plans that included the creation of magnet schools and programs to appeal to a diverse student body, with voluntary busing and school transfers of black and white students and teachers. Although busing had long been used to ease overcrowding, white families protested when integration was the goal. In an effort to stem white flight, the SDP began to experiment with magnet schools in the 1960s. Tragically, some voluntary transfers to magnet schools had the opposite effect. Even after the Samuel Gompers School was converted to a magnet school in 1971, only 2% of its students were white, far below the predicted 31%. Located in the predominantly white overbrick section of West Philadelphia, most of the neighborhood children continued to attend private schools.
I think if families are unwilling to take a risk on a school where there's a minority population, it won't happen.
Some magnet schools were successfully integrated, however. By 1979, the new Carver High School of Engineering and Science triumphantly enrolled almost 300 freshmen in North Philadelphia, with the number evenly balanced between whites and minorities. Nevertheless, only 2 out of 6 magnet schools established in the 1970s actually fostered integration. Tragically, only 6% of Carver students are white today. And although 19 magnet schools and 12 magnet programs were created by 1994, the PHRC found that their modest success did not influence the overall desegregation of Philadelphia's school district. However, the PHRC successfully supervised teacher integration at schools across the district. In 1969, the SDP finally began to implement teacher assignment and transfer policies to achieve a racially balanced faculty. One of the teachers hired and promoted under this policy was Constance Clayton, who was triumphantly appointed the district's first black female superintendent in 1982. Clayton proposed a plan with clear goals that identified specific schools for desegregation through voluntary busing and additional resources to improve low-achieving, mostly black and Hispanic schools. By 1987, the number of students in desegregated schools had increased by 55%. The pace of white flight had slowed. There were 34 newly desegregated schools, and the teaching staff of every school in the city had been integrated. Despite these triumphs, Clayton's plan fell short. The PHRC continued to push for mandatory busing, while the SDP argued that it would bring significant resistance, white flight, as well as the movement of middle-class blacks. Meanwhile, a new report on education unveiled by President Reagan in 1983 shifted the focus from integration to student achievement.
Last year's gain on SAT scores will have to be repeated for more than a decade before we achieve the levels of the mid-60s again. Your commission notes that our education policies have squandered the gains of the Sputnik area. The statistics I just cited underscore the decline in student achievement.
By the time the PHRC's case against the school district was resolved in 2009, school choice was the preferred strategy for reform. In the short term, voluntary busing of students to some magnet and neighborhood schools had modest success. Where integration was implemented, it was often popular and effective, and according to Ralph Smith, architect of Clayton's voluntary desegregation plan, it has served to mobilize attention, resources, and energy in support of educational improvements that otherwise may not have been made. Because of desegregation, we have better schools. In fact, the black-white achievement gap reached its low point near the peak of national desegregation efforts in the late 1980s. In the long term, Americans stopped seeing integration as a strategy to improve school success for students of color. As voluntary desegregation fell out of favor, many Philadelphians began to see the public schools as failing, choosing charter schools instead. Tragically, segregation is still a significant problem in Philadelphia. By 2018, only 24% of teachers in the SDP were black, down from a peak of 40% in the 1990s, and only a striking 14% of students were white. Philadelphia charter schools are even more hyper-segregated than district schools. Even now, decades after Brown, children are still attending schools that are separate and unequal. Students of all colors will continue to suffer the effects of segregation until the state, city, and school district of Philadelphia make educational equity a priority.
To be young, gifted, and black and own it, it's more than a moment. It's like the sun rose to condone it. Before we was trapped in, we was trapped in.